So here's a real quick video of how we might create a data grid in RackForms and populate it with existing values. So what I would do is I'd create a form page, and then I would probably add a bucket because I want a grid-like structure, kind of resize my bucket. And then to that bucket I would add the necessary input fields that I want to add to my grid. So we're going to say we're going to have a 2x2 grid in this particular case. So let me position this something like that. Then what I would do is I would probably rename these guys so that they match the fields that they're going to display. So let's say name, email, and age. And I'm not going to actually populate this guy for right now because I only have really 3 fields that I want to show. But obviously, again, we would create the data grid so they would match how many items we had. Then I would add a query module. We can find that under data in email. And the query module then will select some data from a data source. Now in this particular case, by default, we always select from FB demo, which is actually a table that's installed when we install RackForms. We can actually see what data this is returning by selecting data dump and just running the form. You can see here now that I have an array in Q1 of values. So I have this first row, and I'm actually going to have several different rows of information here. To actually pre-populate my form fields then, I may only need the first row. And if that's the case, I can actually use a nice shortcut by clicking this guy right here under default value, and then selecting the field that I want to populate. So I can select name. For this guy I can select email, and for this guy I can select age. And now when I run this form, let me go ahead and turn off data dump. These fields are now populated with those values. And because these are just standard form fields, if I were to submit this form, and I'm using, say, email or SQL+, these fields would be treated as if they were not really being pre-populated at all. They're just form fields that we want to include. Now, generally speaking, we're not going to create a dummy select statement like this where we're kind of doing where 1 equals 1. We would probably select a specific row of information. However, if we did have multiple rows that we want to return, or we only wanted to return, let's say, the first row of data, I would change the 0 index right here to the row that I wanted. So right now Q1 simply means that there's a PHP variable called Q1 that has gotten the results of my database query. We can actually see that right here. We get to see query a database to Q1. And we define that under results set variable name. So Q1 is a PHP variable that essentially contains an array of values. Q10 means this is the first row of data that was returned. It's a 0-based index, which means 0 equals the first row. Therefore, if I wanted to return the second row of data, I'd simply change all of these zeros to 1. And now when I run this query, instead of returning the first row, I'd return the second row of data, and so on and so forth. So that is how we can create a manual grid of values and pre-populate them at runtime in RackForms.